Yeah, welcome everybody to Digging Deeper, our Wednesday night Bible study. With me is Kevin Upgrove, elder here, Eastland Christian Church. This guy, I'm looking at the camera, so I couldn't really see him. I called you this guy.
Do you need me to say my
Devin
name?
Swickheimer. Sorry, I'm in a mood, I guess. Devin Swickheimer, our associate pastor, and then myself, William, our the lead pastor here at Eastland Christian Church. We're glad that you guys could join us here today and be a part of our study as we finish out Judges 7 and 8, the end of Gideon's story, his almost descent into madness. Gideon does not have a strong ending, and we were talking a little bit before about the study, and for the most part, I think Gideon gets a pass for his behavior, because even though he's a judge of Israel, he does not end very strongly, and so it's interesting. So we're going to get into some of that today. But before we do, we always want to open up with prayer for our church family and just the community around us. So if you will, join us in prayer today, please. Lord God, we thank you for this day. We thank you that you, God, would be the center of our lives, that through you we have worship and we have the study of this word that is changing lives. And so, Lord, I pray that as we study it today, that we would be more like you, that through your history, through learning the history of Israel, we would understand where it leads and what it means to go through and study this. Lord, I pray for our people, just that they would continue to be more like you, that they would continue to be loving and have opportunities to love. God, you are great and awesome. We put all things in your hands today. Amen. You look like you're over there in some intense study there, Kevin.
I'm right here.
All right. So last time we picked up just as at the very end of 7, right? Gideon had just defeated the Midianites in this amazing battle, right, where he had 100 soldiers or 300 soldiers. They were in 3 battalions of 100 each. And they were breaking pots and blowing trumpets, and the Midianites ended up slaughtering themselves just out of fear and everything else that was going on. And then the kings of Midian, the Midian people, the Midianites, kings of the Midianites, they were pursued and taken down by the men of Ephraim. And that's kind of where we pick up in chapter 8 here of our text in Judges chapter 8. I don't think we're going to spend a whole lot of time on Zebah and Zemullah, the remaining, if I even said those names right, the remaining kings of, I keep wanting to say Moab, but it's not Moab, it's Midian.
Midian. Yep.
Yes. And so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. We'll probably read through it real quickly, and then we'll kind of talk about the end of Gideon, the end of his life, because that's kind of really important. So we want to pick up on that. Any of you guys want to read through this? So Kevin volunteers. So yeah, if you will, Kevin.
Okay, so we're picking up here in chapter 8 of Judges, and read along with me if you will. Now the Ephraimites asked Gideon, "Why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?" And they criticized him sharply. But he answered them, "What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer? God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?" And at this their resentment against him subsided. Now Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. And he said to the men of Succoth, "Give my troops some bread, they're worn out, and I am still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the officials of Succoth said, "Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give you bread to your troops?" And Gideon said, "Just for that, when the Lord has given me Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with thorns and briars." And from there he went up to Peniel and made the same request of them. But they answered as the men of Succoth had, and said, so he said to the men of Peniel, "When I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with a force of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the eastern peoples. 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. That's a lot.
Yeah, considering that
And
they had 300 men.
Considering, yes. And Gideon went up by the route of the nomads east of Nobah and Jogabah and fell upon the unsuspecting army. Zebah and Zalmunna, the two kings of Midianite, fled, but he pursued them and captured them, routing their entire army. Gideon the son of Joash then returned from battle by the path of Heres. He caught a young man of Succoth and questioned him, and the young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 officials of Succoth, the elders of the town. And Gideon came to the men and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me by saying, 'Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your exhausted men?'" So he took the elders of the town and taught the men of Succoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. And he also pulled down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the town. And then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?" "Men like you," they answered, "each one with the bearing of a prince." "Those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. And as surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you." Turning to Jether, his oldest son, he said, "Kill them." But Jether did not draw out his sword, because he was only a boy and was afraid. Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Do it yourself. As a man is, so is his strength." So Gideon stepped forward and killed them, and took the ornaments off their camels' necks. And the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us out of the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And he said, "I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder." It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. And they answered, "We'll be glad to give them." So they spread out a garment, and each man threw a ring from his plunder into it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to about 1,700 shekels, not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on their camels. And Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, his town. And all Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon's family. Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. And during Gideon's lifetime, the land enjoyed peace, 40 years. Jerubbaal, son of Joash, went back home to live. And he had 70 sons of his own, for he had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son who he named Abimelech. Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal-berith as their god, and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. And they also failed to show kindness to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good things he had done for him.
That's quite the story there. Quite the historical account for Gideon. So let's start in the first part of 8 and Gideon's pursuit of the two kings, Zeba and Zalmunna. And so he's pursuing them throughout the land, back to Midian, right? Like
Yep.
that's kind of where they're going. They're in retreat.
They're in retreat. They're heading home.
And then he comes across this town, and he, right? He says, "My men are exhausted. They're hungry. Can you feed my men?" And their response is, "No." He said they're taunting. That's what the text says. They taunt them, and so they don't feed them. And then he does the same thing with another town. But then the story. This is kind of the incredible part of the story to me, is that as they move forward, not only do they defeat the army of these two kings, but they rout them, right? Yeah. And so a routing is like this isn't. It's a one-sided battle.
You throw everything down and you run as fast as you can.
Yep. And not only that, but these 300 men who are vastly outnumbered by the Midianite army
and tired and
are
hungry,
also starving and exhausted. And so the only thing that you can take away from this victory is that God gave them into the hands of the Israelites. That's the only thing that you can take away from this, because they don't have the resources, they don't have the manpower. This is a miracle of God for them to do this. And so with that in mind, you might think that the punishment for the two towns for denying the bread doesn't match their sin, so to speak. But if you consider that this is the very will of God, that this is happening because this is a miracle that happens for the Israelite people, hence the will of God, they are in direct face to the will of God. They are denying that to happen.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. But also there's the idea that they probably didn't believe that Gideon was actually going to win those battles. So yes, they were going against the will of God, but it was because they were afraid of backlash from the Midianites for helping Gideon and his army fight these people.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, you got to figure these two towns are on the east side of the Jordan, and they're like right on the border with Midian, so they're going to be the first places that these guys come back with. On as Devin said, for the backlash. So, yeah, they're going to be reluctant to help. They're also looking at Gideon's got 300 people here. They're tired. They're wore out. And these two kings still got 15,000. And they're heading. Karkor was a Midianite stronghold, and this is where they're heading back. And the main route is the route that the army takes. Did a little research on this, and so they're not expecting Gideon to be able to go up the main route with his 300 men against this 15,000. So they figure that Gideon is going to be done, and then Devin, so these guys are going to come back with a vengeance. Yeah. The only difference is that Gideon goes in the back way.
This is so incredible to me, because this is like if a football team were to battle the entire stadium that they were fighting.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Like this is kind of the equivalency in numbers.
Yes.
And so you would never like look at that and go, well, I think maybe the football team has a chance.
Yeah, you wouldn't do it. And it is like, and this is what they're seeing, because they've seen the Midianite army heading back to the east, followed by this ragtag group of worn-out Israelites, led by this guy named Gideon.
Yeah.
And they're thinking, there is no way he's gonna, they're going to get into the stronghold. He's going to attack the stronghold. They're going to nail him in this pass that leads into the stronghold, and that's it. And then they're going to come back with a vengeance. And you know, but it tells us that when they went into Karkor with the you know, they have 15,000 men, which was all that was left of his army. And it says 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. So we don't know what the time of frame was in this battle. We know it started at night. Now we don't know where we're at now as far as clock hours for this battle has been going on, but the inference from Scripture is that it's a continuous running battle with the people coming down from the Manasseh and the others, and then calling down the Ephraimites to hold the ford at the river. This is a running battle. This is a continuous. This doesn't stop. I mean, it's hard hitting and.
Well, even just consider how long it would take 300 people to battle 120,000 people. Like, just the sheer amount of time that would take for just that particular thing.
Well, I think to keep in mind that these 300 weren't responsible for the entire 120,000
yeah.
Falling, but yeah, I mean, this is the core, and
Right.
And you know, you're probably talking a couple of days running here, you know, or more, and the Midianites are fleeing on their camels, and they're probably mounted, this group that finally got back together, so they're outdistancing the Israelites who would be on foot, and getting back to Karkor, which, again, like I said, that was the main stronghold there. And it had one pass actually that one main area that entered it, which was easily flanked and, you know, from military point of view. But what Gideon does is he doesn't go in as a direct assault. He goes up by the route of the nomads east of Noba. So he comes down over this back mountain trail, if you will, and catches them unsuspecting. And that's the end of it. And he routs that army with his 300, just like he did the main army earlier.
Yep.
And only this time he gets the kings. And now he's bringing them back. And on the way back, he's going to stop here at Peniel and Sukkoth, and he's going to say, all right, you know, you guys were, like you said, denying that God was in charge of this victory and for all practical purposes, assisting the enemy over your own brothers and your own kinsmen. And so there comes the punishment.
Yeah. And then he lays out the two kings. And this is kind of brutal, right? He like executes the two of them. But he asks his son to do it.
Yep.
Right? Like, there's a measure of brutality here that's, I guess, war is definitely brutal for sure. But this is like an extra level of that, right? Like, he's going a step ahead in this kind of punishment of these two kings. They're already captive. Their army is already defeated. And he puts his son to the task of killing them.
But it's a little bit of a personal vengeance,
yes,
too, because the kings had killed their brothers up at Tabor.
Yep.
At an earlier time, evidently, and he remembers this, and so this is a revenge, and it's rather cold. It's a cold revenge.
I would agree.
And so he wants his son to do it, and of course his son is afraid because it says he's only a boy. But you know, the interesting part is then the king's response.
Yeah, do it yourself.
What are you, a coward? Do it yourself.
Yeah, Don't send a boy to do a
Don't
man's
send
job.
a boy to do a man's job. And right there facing death. I mean, they're taunting him. They're spitting in his face right there, you know.
Yeah.
Evidently, maybe they don't think Gideon's going to kill him.
I don't see why not. I mean, he just slaughtered their army.
Yeah.
I don't. Maybe it just speaks to their pride that they had.
be.
A lot of these ancient kings thought that they were gods themselves or descended from gods. And so maybe it has something to do with that they maybe, and that's just speculation on my part completely.
Maybe they didn't accept the defeat.
Yeah.
And figured, yeah.
You want to add something, Devin? I could tell.
No, well, this is just like one of those sections in the Bible that I'm just like, it always, like there's certain things in the Bible that I've always been like, I don't know why this is in here. Because they're just, and I just have to like trust that there's a reason behind it. And then I also have to look at it from the point of view is not everything in the Bible. Yes, this whole battle was ordained by God and chosen by God, but not everything that every person does and every action that they take is specifically done in God's will. Like it's not.
Right.
So it's just kind of interesting the back and forth that they have. It's more of what you would see in like I guess a typical like war movie today.
Yeah.
When people are like I'll never bow to you. Type deal.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting.
Well,
But
we can see to your point about that. We can see a transformation of Gideon within this story, right? So when we first meet Gideon, he's hiding from the armies,
Right.
and even up until the battle of the Midianites, he's kind of doubting and he's kind of afraid. But what do we see here? We see this like cold, vengeful person who's like going from town to town, torturing and killing the elders and the men of the town. And then he comes to the point where he like takes his own vengeance on the two kings of the Midian army. And so there's this real big transformation in who we see Gideon to be. And then this is going to play out into what Kevin read a little earlier, where he is, right? He doesn't handle that responsibility very well.
He doesn't handle the responsibility or the success very well. And in the latter part of this chapter, we see that Gideon, he's at this point, maybe he's getting a little heady.
He basically
he's
turns
coming off
into one of the kings of Midian, is essentially what he turns into.
Pretty much, yeah.
He's vicious, and he creates this idol, and he's basically not himself anymore.
No, he does pretty much become like them. It's an issue of how often. What we see here is a person. He starts out fair, pretty good actually, and he gets this big victory, and now he's got this, and it's starting to go to his head. And where you see it is, of course, the first thing is the Israelites all come to him and they want him to rule over him. You, your sons, and your grandson. They want to start a kingship here with a line of succession. I mean, it's all right, boom, right there. Here it is. And Gideon starts out with, no, I'm not going to do that. The Lord's going to rule over you. Okay? And right there he's good because he's right. However, well, there is one thing you can do. Everybody give me a gold earring from the plunder, because the Ishmaelites all wore gold earrings. So they all threw in a gold earring. Now he's got like 43 pounds of gold here of this plunder. So what's the first thing he does? He makes an idol with it.
Yep.
And then everybody's worshiping this idol there, and it's like, Let's do a little timeout here. What did we just get rid of?
Yeah. How did we get from point A to point B? How did this happen?
I mean, it's like instead of going straight line here, we went back around the circle, and but see, this is disgusting. This is Gideon's. in all the headiness of the success of this great victory, he lost his way. He lost his focus. And I really got to stop, and you look throughout history, how many people have come to the pinnacle of success only to fall, to be crushed because they can't handle it. Okay? I think, a lot of the rock and rollers in the 60s that went to the pinnacle of success, and all of a sudden they're all wrapped up in the hero worship from the crowds and the fans and the attention and everything else, and they lose it, right? And they lose it to the drugs, and they lose it to the sex or whatever, and we see that with actors a lot. And I could think of several that were childhood actors and actresses that just went up and all of a sudden they can't handle it anymore.
Yeah.
And from there it goes down, and this is kind of what we see has happened with Gideon. He builds this idol, and they start worshiping this idol, and that's why God sent the Midianites in anyway.
Well, we can see that there's a change in his humility, right? So when they kill Oreb and what's the other one's name? Zeb. When they kill them and the Ephraimites come to him and they're like, "Hey," they're basically arguing over glory, right? Who has the glory of this? And he, in his humility, is kind of like, "You guys have it. You guys
got the leaders."
And then at the end here, he's basically saying, like, give me the glory. By saying, give me one of the gold rings, he's essentially snatching that glory for himself, right? To the victor go the spoils.
Right.
And so that's what he's sort of doing in essence here, is by asking for this, he's asking for them to kind of glorify him as the commander-in-chief of this army. And so it's a paradigm shift of where his humility is and who he is.
Yeah, and in the end, you start to see where, as this shift occurs, he starts living like the Eastern kings.
Mm-hmm.
Because then we go down and look. It says in verse 29, Jerubbaal, which is Gideon, the son of Joash, went back home to live. He had 70 sons of his own, for he had many wives, and he had a concubine who lived in Shechem, who also bore him a son named Abimelech. Abimelech translates out to son of the king. So there's a problem here.
Yeah.
Because he's not the king. And but he's got into this lifestyle living of the Eastern kings of Midian in the many wives, hence the 70 sons.
Yeah. Yeah, not to mention any daughters that he would have.
And
he has
a
huge lineage.
Yeah, and right. This is strictly the sons. Now, if it's a 1-to-1, he's got 140 kids.
and a lot of
figure
wives
it out.
to bear them kids as well. Yes. Yeah, and I do think we can kind of see that he essentially turns into the enemy that he destroyed.
He does. He becomes the enemy.
How Gideon's story kind of ends. Although there is this interesting, the last verse in chapter 8 is very interesting to me, where they also failed to show any loyalty to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in spite of all the good things that he had done for them. So there was a measure of Gideon is still the judge, right?
He's still the
he's
judge.
still bringing people back to God.
The
but
land
then-
has peace for 40 years.
Yeah. But then there's also this idol worship and this other stuff. And so it doesn't tell us all the good things, or maybe it's just literally referencing the destruction of the Midianites as the good things that he has done. But I'm assuming, because this is over the course of 40 years, that there's probably a lot of things that Gideon does well, to be fair to him. But then we also see, like, essentially, I think it's idiocy to rank sins, but idolatry is definitely like one of the worst. And so it's weird that he has this two-sided nature to him, right? Well, I guess that's not weird. That's
Yeah, but
human nature. That's who
like
we
all
are.
of us. Yeah.
For real. Yeah. What did you want to add there, Devin?
Well, I've been doing a lot of listening because I feel like you guys are teaching me a decent amount tonight too. It's just when I was reading the text earlier this week and today, it was something that I was just like, what does all this mean? Because I do see what you are all saying about him turning into the kings and stuff like that, but I also see it as almost a slippery slope into that. It's almost as if it's not something that he actively chose. It's something that he did one thing and it turned into this, and then he just kept letting it happen out of his. He was like, oh, I like this attention.
Yeah.
It's I like all this. So I find that kind of interesting with our own lives, because I feel like a lot of times sin is a slippery slope and we just kind of fall in. It's a one-time thing, then
Yeah.
a two-time thing, then a five-time thing, then doing it every day thing.
Yep. It gets easier and easier every time, right?
But I just see that when even we look at when he first made the ephod, when he first made the idol per se, it almost, I mentioned this to you guys earlier, it almost seemed as if he placed it in his hometown to be a monument to the battle, but then it turned into an idol. But he wanted it to, either way, he wanted it to be a monument to his victory. So that's what it seems to me, is he wanted that to be a monument to the battle that he had won, and it to be memorable for the people.
Yeah. And then there's this interesting word that you're talking about, this idol, right? It uses the word all Israel. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there. So it wasn't just like Oprah, the town of Oprah and his family, but like
Right.
this
It was all of them.
right. So this was a big thing throughout the land, that when he made this, it was something that had recognition through the land.
I'm starting to, just by like this conversation, I'm starting to see it more in a different light. I've heard the idea of the Israelites worshiping the battle or the miracle more than the God who performed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very true to this specific situation, because we see even when they first got out of Egypt, they're very happy about everything that God had done for them, except for right now, because things are a little hard.
Yeah.
So they're happy about the miracles in the moment, and just that idea of them worshiping the battle that had been won, because that's what that is. That idol is spoils from the battle that had been won.
Mm-hmm.
So they're worshiping the battle that had been won more than they're worshiping the God who won the battle.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, that is a very interesting thought. We'll worship the victory instead of the victor.
I mean, it's similar to like even a lot of other religions, like pagan religions that we think of. They worship nature instead of the God of nature.
Yeah. Well, and the text kind of supports that a little bit, because like God thinned Gideon's army so that they would know that it was God who won the victory, not they themselves. And then immediately after the battle was won, they, instead of right? Like the whole reason they didn't have a king was because God was supposed to be their king, and that's what Gideon says. And the first thing that they do is they come to Gideon and they ask him to be the king. And the whole reason that they only had that they thinned that army in the first place was so that
Well, and-
God
and-
would have the glory and not
And this is the
them.
reason, because they say, because you have saved us out of the hand of Midian.
Yep.
So they totally miss the miracle.
I am just dumbfounded at how they could miss the miracle, right? Like you were 300 soldiers. Yeah. Gideon must have been a charismatic man. That's all I could
It's
say.
hindsight, and you know, and I would agree. You know, that could be where it says that they worship there, and then it says it became a snare to Gideon and his family because they're worshiping the victory,
Yeah.
and they're not worshiping God who brought them the victory.
I'm also curious how much of the different other worships that we see, right? When Gideon cuts down the Asherah pole and burns the altar to Baal, when Gideon dies, and the text tells us that no sooner had Gideon died
Right,
than they
yeah, this-
returned to Baal worship. I'm
boom,
curious how
they-
much of that was even involved in sort of this idol worship a little bit. Like, did they sprinkle in a little bit of stuff, or
They might have.
or how did it come? Because it seems to me that like for them to immediately go back at the death of Gideon seems a little too quickly, and so I'm wondering if there was almost a buffer there between them.
It almost feels like, if I put it in modern terms, people following the pastor and not the religion, or the
Yeah.
pastor and not the God. So
Right.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
This is a good text.
Yeah, it is. You know, and the interesting thing is there in verse 30 is they set up Baal Berith, which is Baal of the covenant. And it's like, what covenant?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And as their God, and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of their enemies on every side. I mean, okay, Gideon is in the land, enjoys peace for 40 years, and Gideon dies, and they go right back to it. So it's a generation. And so it's like, what did they teach their kids during these 40 years?
To
After
kill
the
your
fact.
enemies. That's what he's teaching his kids.
What did they learn about God?
Yes, I want to know.
See, what were they teaching them? I mean, were they teaching them anything about the law?
Right.
Anything about the covenant with Abraham?
When Gideon tells this story to his kids, does he mention that he saw the face of God?
Yeah, is he even telling them this?
Yeah.
And or is he talking about, well, there was this big victory, and you know, I did this and I did that, and like this. But what is the rest of Israel teaching their children? Now, think about this. I mean, it's one generation, and it's gone. So that's telling me that. And then we had talked about this earlier. I'm thinking about, you know, all of this takes place not far from Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle and the Ark of God is, which is where the priests are supposed to be ministering. And you know, under the rules, you know, the descendants of Aaron, as set down by God in the wilderness, what are they doing? Yeah, where
Nothing.
are they in all of this?
They're doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And so nobody's getting taught this. And nobody's getting taught about God and what He's done and the Creator and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're worshiping this great victory. They're giving Gideon all the credit for 40 years now, and the land has peace. And now they go back,
They know a little bit about it because, right, Gideon confronts
confronts
the
them.
angel of the Lord about that, where he's like, you did all those great things in Egypt, but what are you doing now? So,
Right.
so they know a little bit about it, but definitely not to the but they're still worshiping idols.
Right,
So,
right. It's not there. Now, I got to look at the parallel in our country today.
preach it.
I got to look at the parallels, and I got to look at, you go into the average church, and where are the young people? You have the parents, but where are the youngins? Where are the children? Where are the parents who are raising their children?
Yeah.
According to this book here. Where are they? What's happening with that? Why is it that, they hit like junior high school and they're not here anymore? Why is that? Where is it happening? What are the parents teaching the children? Well, you look out there and the parents are all about success. And this has been around since when I was his age or before. And, it's natural. We want our children to have a better life than we do. So the parents are throwing all of them, everything they've got into success and everything else. And the kids are coming away with whatever happens to be the fad, if you will, coming out of the universities or through the education system of that year. And rather than being taught a hard truth, everything is relevant. And now you have all this relativism, and the result is, what we have is a society that's pretty much just like this. What you read a lot in Judges is everybody does what's right in their own eyes. It's right for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. So my brain is working like 5 minutes behind your guys's tonight, it seems. But I'm just taking what you're saying right now and what we've talked about in the past week or so about like this idea of what is important to you. Because I was thinking about the idea of God of the covenant. It's almost as if the Israelite people are bringing true God down to the level of these fake gods, the Baals. They're like, oh, we're lumping our
Yeah, they're
God.
all the same. They're all deities.
Yeah, we're
Right.
lumping that in. And I'm just thinking about that in the sense of today, because you're saying what works for you is what works for everybody. I'm thinking about like universalism, like all paths lead to heaven type deal.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just a really good preaching point, honestly. Like this text right here could preach. It could.
Yep.
And it's just kind of cool. Well, it's not cool that it happened, but I think it's kind of an interesting text to look at in the eyes of today, because I remember you were talking about like what is important to us and what should we be modeling for our kids. Is God just as important as soccer?
Yep.
Is God just as important as
Mathematics.
mathematics? Yeah. Because he should be more important, and he shouldn't be brought down to the same level as these other things in your life. To
Yeah.
be fair, those things aren't necessarily idols as they like false gods,
Right.
Well,
but they can still
keep
take
in
the place
mind
of-
that an idol, by definition, is anything that becomes between you and God.
Yeah.
So, yes, they do become idols.
Yeah.
That soccer game that I got to be at on Sunday morning, soccer becomes your God instead of being in worship, this practice for this, or studying to get an A on this test. Now, is it important to study? Yeah, it is. But it should not be more important than God.
Yeah.
And this is what's happened. You know, and this is I think it's tragic for this country, and we are seeing a lot of the results of it, not just here but around the world, but very much so in the U.S. with the affluence and the riches. You know, I mean, we're a rich country. You know, the poorest person in this country is still richer than the vast majority of the people in the world. You know, if you have a pair of shoes, you're in the top 10%. Really and truly, and you know, this is what's happened, and we're putting so much into having to, you know, all these good things and the best of the best, and wow, there's a brand new TV out there, so I'm going to take mine down that's only a year old and get rid of it so I can get this brand new one, and then I'm going to buy the latest and the greatest computer or watch computer or whatever that's out there, so I have the latest and the greatest, and I'm going to always, every year I'm going to upgrade it and all of that. And you know, this is what's happening, and to the extent of, you know, materialism has become the god. Materialism has become the religion, if you will, of the Western world. And now we've reached a point of, you know, we're not too far from where the Canaanite religions were.
Mm.
You know.
Well, hopefully we don't turn back to that, because they did some.
I mean, that was some bad stuff.
Yeah, they did some nasty stuff.
And you know, but sin is sin. And where have we missed? Where have we missed? You know, we live we're going to make America great again. Well, America's not my God. Okay? Right?
Yes.
And this is what's been happening.
Mm.
And this is an example of like what happened right here. You know, this is what I'm reading in this. And then what happens? Well, as soon as the leader's gone, okay, everybody back to where it was before.
Let's go right back.
Let's go right back. And they do. So they enjoy a period of peace and prosperity for 40 years, and then it's like, okay.
Mm.
And this is what happens. And then the next thing that goes on is they also fail to show kindness to Gideon's family.
Yeah.
For all the good things he's done. So not only do they just go back to the way it was, but there's not even any gratitude for what they have.
Yeah, and we'll see that in this story of Abimelech,
Sure.
which is one of Gideon's sons, which we will cover next time since we're coming closer to our end here. So why don't you guys go ahead and close this out? I'll go over there and get the stream ready to cut off. Thanks, everybody, for being a part of our study here in the book of Judges. We'll continue with chapter 9 next time, and I'll hand it off to you guys.
I was thinking the same thing. It's a good time to cut off because we covered all the good content. We did it all. I think it was good.
All right. One of the things, this reminds me a lot of, I've been doing a Sunday morning study in Ecclesiastes, and one of the things that Solomon says is there's nothing new under the sun. What is being done now has been done many times before. And this is a perfect example of what's being done, has been done, and it's been done over. But what we need to focus on, folks, is what God does for us each and every day as our Creator and our Provider our sustainer.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to focus on. That's what we need to remember. That's who we need to worship. That's who needs to be in front of us and first all the time. And when we focus on that, everything else is going to fall into place. And that's the goal. And that's the we study this, and we study what's happened, and we look at some of the whys maybe, and we look at some of the hows and the whats, but the focus is always on the who. And in this case, the focus always needs to be on God. And what happens when it's not? Now, the challenge is to keep your focus on God, to keep Him first and Him foremost, and to think what His desires are and what His things are, because we know that Jesus told us if we seek His kingdom first, everything else gets added unto us. And that's the goal, to seek the kingdom of God first. We're open on Wednesdays for here. You're more than welcome to join us in person. On Sunday mornings, if you want to learn more, hey, Bible studies are at 9:30. We've got classes for all ages. And our worship service is at 10:30. Come and join us. If you're looking for something that you can put your trust in that's not going to move or not going to sway or turn around, come on out and see us. We can do it. We'll show you. It's not me. It's not Devin. It's not William. But it's this word right here. This is God's word. And that's what we can put our trust in and our faith in, to have a constant, something you can solidly hang on to in this changing world. We'll close with a prayer.
Yeah, I can do that. Dear Lord, I want to thank you for everything that you've given us, and I pray that you continue to be with us and bring us back to you always, and let our minds see you in all that happens around us. Because as we talked about tonight, we have lots of blessings in this country, but let us not worship the blessings, but help us worship you. Bring us back to you, and please, Lord, be with us throughout our week. Fill us with your love, and let our actions be an outpouring of that. In your Son's name, Jesus Christ, amen.